So welcome back, and thank you for joining us for our third panel, Collecting for the Future. Before I start, I'd like to share some access information. For those of us joining us virtually, you can access closed captioning in English by turning on this feature on the options bar. Thank you again to our captioners, Bonnie Rothermel and Annette Weidman. As a reminder, each session will be a series of presentations followed by conversation among the panelists, followed by time for questions from the audience here. Restrooms are located outside of the theater on this floor, and if you need to exit for any reason during the program, please use the doors at the back of the room where you entered. This panel, to remind everyone, will be focused on collecting for the future, and will hopefully build on the two terrific panels we've already heard in the day, and a big thank you to everyone who participated in those. It's left me thinking about a lot of things. This panel is going to consider models and ideas for collecting going forward, and the ethical implications and practical considerations of building and caring for collections now and in the future. To help us explore these questions and imagine what I imagine will be a range of possibilities, I'm very happy to be joined by this group of terrific panelists, and we've saved the biggest panel for last today, which I'm excited about. Naomi Beckwith is here with us today, which I'm very happy about. Welcome, Naomi. Naomi is the Deputy Director and Jennifer and David Stockman Chief Curator at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. Prior to joining the Guggenheim, Beckwith was the Manilow Senior Curator at the MCA Chicago, where her exhibitions and publications centered on the impact of identity and multidisciplinary practices within contemporary art. Beckwith serves on the boards of the Laundromat Project and chaired the inaugural Curatorial Leadership Summit at the Armory Show in 2018. She's received fellowships at the Whitney Museum of American Art, at our ISP program, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, and the Center for Curatorial Leadership, and many other institutions. Welcome, Naomi. We're also very happily joined by Candice Hopkins. Candice is a citizen of Carcross Tagish First Nation and the Executive Director and the Chief Curator of the fairly recently opened Forge Project. Hopkins' writing and curatorial practice explores the intersections of history, contemporary art, and indigeneity. She's worked as Senior Curator for the 2019 and 2022 editions of the Toronto Biennial of Art and was part of the curatorial team for the Canadian Pavilion of the 58th Venice Biennale, featuring the work of the media art collective Isuma. In 2022, she was the recipient of the inaugural Noah Davis Prize, along with Thomas Lax and Jamila James. Welcome, Candice. We're also joined by Alex Kitnick. Kitnick is an art historian and critic and assistant professor of art history and visual culture at Bard College. A contributor to Artform in October, his book Distant Early Warning, Marshall McLuhan and the Transformation of the Avant-Garde was recently published by the University of Chicago Press. And Alex has also written a lot about museums and collections and kind of where we are with that in this moment. We're also joined by Pilar Tompkins Rivas. Pilar is the Chief Curator and Deputy Director of Curatorial Collections at the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, a new museum dedicated to the art of visual storytelling that is currently under construction and that we're all eagerly awaiting the opening of in Los Angeles. In her role at the Lucas, Tompkins Rivas provides leadership, strategic direction, and managerial oversight for curatorial exhibitions, acquisitions, collections management, conservation, and archives. Thank you for making the time to be here. Just say that. We're also joined by Cheryl Finley. Cheryl Finley is the inaugural director of the Atlanta University Center Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective, distinguished visiting professor at Spelman College, and associate professor at Cornell University. Another person, thank you for making the time to be here. Committed to engaging strategic partners and partners to transform the art and culture industry. She leads an innovative undergraduate program at the world's largest historically Black college and university consortium in preparing the next generation of African American museum and visual arts professionals. Cheryl will be presenting with Amy Whitaker, who we're very happy is here. Amy is an associate professor at NYU in the Steinhardt School's Department of Art and Art Professions. Whitaker teaches business to artists, art to business people, and economics to arts managers. She started her career in art museums, including the Guggenheim, MoMA, and Tate, Amy's the author of 3 books, Museum Legs, Art Thinking, and Economics of Visual Art, Market Practice, and Market Resistance. Amy also has a MFA. Amy and Dr. Cheryl Finley are currently collaborating on a project about the history and future of museum collecting. So thank you all so much for being here, and without further ado, I will pass it along to Naomi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here at the Whitney. Thank you especially Jane and Ramsey Colbert, who really had to corral me to get me here today, but I'm excited to not only be here and talk about my thoughts at the Guggenheim, but also to learn from the other panelists here today. And before I start, I also just want to offer my condolences to the team here on the imminent loss of their amazing colleague, David Breslin. But that is also a backhanded congratulations to you, David. I've been invited today to talk about the future of collections, but because I can never really predict that, what I can really talk about maybe right now is the present and what got us there, especially at the Guggenheim, and then really think about ways in which we can maybe form a different kind of future, or maybe a future like the present that I'm about to talk about now. This is a slide, an installation of a show that we have on view right now at the Guggenheim, a show called Sensory Poetics, Collecting Abstraction, and as the name basically implies, it is a show of works in our collection. But it is one that I'm happy to see in this form because, as you can see from this installation side, it is a show of mostly women, especially women of color, and women from Latin America. And it is a project that I don't think we could have anticipated even about 10 years ago being possible at the Guggenheim. It is really the case that, as you all may know, especially those of you of a certain age, it's not generally the tenor of the Guggenheim to have collection shows with a kind of profile, a demographic profile that looks like this. We are a museum that was really founded, obviously thinking about not only abstraction, but abstraction particularly coming out of Western Europe and North America. And so at some point, though, the Guggenheim kind of got global ambitions, maybe around the 80s, and we all know that what grew out of that was a kind of consortium of international museums, the first one being in Bilbao. But as the museum began to grow globally, it kept that kind of core focus on this Western European abstraction and its sort of children here in the US. It was basically working on what I like to call a kind of export model, where the Guggenheim and its core collections were at the center of this kind of discourse. And you can see here the first show of its collection in the Frank Lloyd Wright building in 1960. And there are some amazing sort of masterpieces. We see a woman or two sort of thrown in there, but again, you see a particular kind of field, a particular kind of field of great abstract painting, even in particular with the Modigliani sort of snuck in there as figuration, to show really not only what Solomon Guggenheim was trying to kind of amass at a time when he was about the only one in the US really holding a collection like this, but also to really show his kind of social and I would say real ethical ambitions around the collection. He and the founding director, Hilary Bay, I like to say the founding director was a woman, hallelujah, really had this idea that their practice wasn't only to hold objects, but to really take care of artists. Many of the artists that they were working with were escaping World War II and really sort of trying to find a home in either peaceful nations in Europe or in the States. And so they knew that this project was very much about the caretaking of people as it was the objects. And they really also wanted to start a museum, not just hold this private collection, but to start a museum as a kind of offering to a public. Again, in reaction to World War II, they were imagining that we had to build a new kind of society. And in order to do that, you had to change this kind of belligerency in the hearts and minds of people. And they thought that abstract art could be a tool by which you change people's mind and really induce peace. And it's a wonderful, I think, and a beautiful ambition. But essentially what happens is, of course, the collection becomes one-sided. So there's a way in which the Guggenheim, like many people, began to understand that a new concept of the global and a new concept of globalism had to come to the fore. So instead of it being this kind of export model of a kind of legacy, a great white legacy institution, sort of moving its work out into the world, it needed to be in conversation with other geographies, other places. And as such, the Guggenheim then initiated a program called the Ubs Map Program. Some of you may be familiar with this. And it was a program by which we invited curators in to do research on 3 primary geographic regions: South Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. We all also understand that these are all geographically contested terms, but this was the focus of where the Guggenheim would do this kind of deep research at the time. And here's an installation shot of its exhibition, a culminating exhibition from South Asia, and followed by an installation shot of the similar project that followed from Latin America. And I think these were really great, amazing projects that brought in new scholarship, new thinking, new opportunities for both the museum and for our audiences. And it also allowed for all the works in the exhibitions to come into the collection. So then we get a massive influx that begins in one fell swoop to change the face and the tenor of the collection itself. Now, of course, as amazing as this kind of project was, it runs the danger of basically becoming a one-off, right? We get about 50 objects into the collection at one time, and then the question is, what happens after that? I think for those of you who work in collecting museums and at collecting institutions, you understand that most of us are a collection of collections. And a collection of bequests, a collection of estates. We basically have existed on the generosity and largesse of many people who have done amazing works to amass objects. But if I could rattle off a few names that have come into the Guggenheim, we have, of course, at the museum, the founding collection of Solomon R. Guggenheim. And then we got the collection of his niece, Peggy Guggenheim. And then came Justin Tannhauser, who was a dealer in Germany and escaped to come here from the war. There was the Nierendorf collection, very similar sort of early 19th century to 20th century European work. Then comes the Bowen collection, the Panza collection, the Mapplethorpe collection. Amazing, amazing, amazing works. But what you can obviously glean from that list of collections is there's a kind of overwhelming whiteness that persists in that. So I think the bigger question is, what do you do in order to think about rebuilding collections in the future? To think through that, I've been doing a lot of research on the collection at the MCA in Chicago, where I was before I came to the Guggenheim. And then, of course, I've been looking at the makeup of the collection in the Guggenheim. And instead of sort of basically stealing the work that I'd done at the MCA and presenting it to you today, because it was in a kind of graphic that I could present, and it's not yet. At the Guggenheim, I actually borrowed this image by a journalist named Mona Shalabi, who does amazing work in kind of translating demographics into and data into visual works. And this is her presentation of what museum collections in the U.S. look like. And I will say that number is not only consistent with what I saw at the MCA, but so far also consistent with what I've seen at the Guggenheim. Now, I'll also say, though, that those numbers remain persistent even though over the last 10 years or so, both institutions have done amazing amounts of work in collecting non-white and non-white European artists. But the percentages remain this consistent. And so here's Mona's sort of visualization of what a museum would look like should you find parity in the collection. So you see a lot of growth in that field. You see a lot of growth, obviously, in the objects there. Now, we have a problem, right? Museum collections can only grow so much physically, right? So the real question remains, what do we do to get to a kind of parity in our collections? And is that the goal? And I think that's also a fair question to pose. And I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but I can say that there's going to be a lot of demands on us on multiple levels in order to at least have a collection that looks like this, even if it's not at that scale. I think one of the biggest demands, of course, is thinking about those legacy collections that come to us. Where are we sourcing these large gifts? And are we even seeding collections now that can become gifts in the future to museums, collections that are not these sort of traditionally seen white male collections? It's also the case this is going to take a massive capital investment, and it's clear from what the work that I've done both at the MCA and at the Guggenheim so far, that in order to really see parity come to the collection, you need the same amount of energy to build up to this as you did to build up to the collections of the past. So if it, for instance, in the case of the Guggenheim, took 75 years, and I don't know how many billions of dollars to get to this, it will take that again to get up to that. And so I always want to impress upon people that this is not going to be a quick change action, right? We can collect nothing but Black artists next year, and you will see a single-digit percentage change in the overall collection, right? This is a long-term, multi-decade, multi-tenure, billions of dollars of investment project that we're talking about, not a quick solution. But I also think this comes with new ethical demands too, about how we present our collections physically and digitally. I think it behooves us to make sure that collections become a normal part of our programming, that they're constantly on display, and that we also think about new interpretive strategies, right? It doesn't make sense, I think, for us to come with the same kind of formalist analysis of certain objects when they come into the collection, when they're not made under the kind of conditions of, an abstract formalism, as we would often see in the Guggenheim collections. So these are some of the demands that I think are there that may bring clarity to the collections that we want to build in the future. But in sort of parting, I will leave one word of advice, which is when these sort of temporary initiatives happen, projects like the UBS program that did this wonderful work, and then was meant to kind of dissolve afterwards. It's really important to hold on to some vestiges of that. And so one of the things that we did, at least for that project, was hire the curators as at-large curators for the institutions. They're not permanent part of the institution. In fact, they don't want to be for that matter. But we still are able to hold them as part of our brain trust. And they are still leaving their imprint on the collection past those exhibitions. And as such, then, we're able to put on a show like Sensory Poetics that looks like that. So I'm happy for the work that we're doing, but I realize there's a lot more work to do. So thank you.
Check the PowerPoint, sorry. Oh, no, you're all set, okay. All set. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and with Amy Whitaker, Dr. Amy Whitaker. My name is Cheryl Finley, and we're really excited to share our research in progress on ownership, stewardship, and display. We would like to just begin by welcoming the organizers of this convening at the Whitney Museum, Jane Panetta, Kim Kanate, Ramsey Culber, and the rest of the team. So thank you so much for having us. Today, we have written this together, but we haven't practiced delivering it together.
I'm
so
gonna distract you.
but yes. Anyway,
Once you say that, it'll be seamless.
of course. So today we want to talk about collecting, interrogating what museums own, how museums deal with works that are politically, conceptually, and logistically hard to own, and how we think about museums as stewards of these works. I actually want to start with a work of art that was sold in the art market, Dred Scott's White Male for Sale, a 2021 video work that was made into a non-fungible token and sold in the general post-war to the present sale at Christie's, New York on October 1st, 2021. The work was listed as estimate on request. In a panel that I moderated at Christie's, Dredd explained what he thought the work should sell for. The lifetime earnings of a white male in the United States, even for a lower paid job, is $2 million estimated. Dredd thought the work should sell for that amount. Compared to other NFT prices, as high as Beeple's Everydays, which had sold at Christie's for $69,348,000, and some of Beeple's other works that sold for in the $6 to $10 million range, the price seemed to make sense. The work instead sold for a paltry $32,500. Now, we can read that as a failure on the part of the marketing team, or as a further conceptual statement on the undervaluing of Black bodies that were treated as fungible or interchangeable during the transatlantic slave trade and in slave markets, something that Dredd's work has engaged with conceptually in presenting a white male for sale as in a non-fungible format. Another reason, perhaps, that the work didn't command a higher price is due to the way it directly indicted the basis of the nation's economic systems and financial wealth. Instead of the joy of acquisition, it was the confirmation of complicity. So when museums acquire work, they purchase them or via donation, when they acquire ownership of them. Their owning bodies of work is something that I'd like for us to meditate on just for a moment, especially in relationship to the current moment of DEI&A motivated collecting, and to works of art that, like White Male for Sale, interrogate the economic structure around the work. Of course, we could look at this historic work by David Hammons, his Blizzard Ball sale, and we've seen other performance-based engagements with economic structures and ephemerality of artworks. And this is something that was photographed, of course, by Dawood Bey in 1983, and there are other examples, especially in the work of David Hammons.
Thank you. Echoing Cheryl's thanks to the organizers, and also totally a pleasure and mind-expanding to work with Dr. Finley. If we take this line of thinking about Dred Scott's work, David Hammond's work, and we think about it in a museum collecting context, a work that really comes to mind is Cameron Rowland's Disgorgement, 2016. This is one of several works that is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. As many of you know, those works are not acquired, as in bought by the museum, because the artist does not allow that. Some of the works are rented by the museum for 5 years. Some of them are stewarded. The museum has agreed to help support the ongoing trust of this work under certain circumstances. This work is listed as an extended loan from the artist. And the reason that that is important is because, again, as many of you may know, this work takes as its subject matter the role of the insurance company Aetna in the transatlantic slave trade that Cheryl was mentioning, and the fact that Aetna had enriched itself as a company by issuing insurance policies on enslaved persons. And so this project, and there's a wonderful essay on the MoMA website, it draws on the congressional proposals by John Conyers of Michigan for reparations to be considered every year. It draws on some work by Dedria Farmer Paleman, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing her name, this idea of disgorgement, of creating a trust out of the shares of the company so that if the company goes up, there's a way of participating in that in order to participate structurally in reparations. And again, we see echoes of this type of thinking in other work where there is economic consideration of the larger ecosystem. This is a work of Hans Hacke on landlords, ownership of real estate, also work by Haka looking at the economic holdings of museum board members. And as many of you know, Haka's role as one of the artists who used the resale royalties contract, the Siegelev-Perdansky agreement, for so long. So this question of how we think about collecting things that have this market imprint of Dread's work and that have political content where acquisition or collecting is really problematic.
So other forms of art complicate collecting. Public works such as the Four Freedoms Project of commissioning artist billboards in all 50 states, and works by the group Cause Collective, or Adrian Piper's works, bring in audiences as collaborators. This is a work by Jessica Ingram, who is working with the Four Freedoms Project, her Vote for Vernon Dahmer billboard from 2018. And just to say something for those of you who are not aware of the work of Four Freedoms, which began in 2016, this is just a quote from the website describing the project and the initiative and its impetus. Quote, "Four Freedoms is a platform for greater participation in the arts and in civil society. We produce exhibitions, installations, public programs, and billboard campaigns to advocate for inclusive civic participation. Inspired by American artist Norman Rockwell's paintings of Franklin D. Roosevelt's Four Freedoms from 1941, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, Four Freedoms Federation uses art to encourage and deepen public explorations of freedom in the 21st century." And again, thinking about the work of this collective that we see all across the 50 states and billboards, and some of you may have actually driven by some of these during the pandemic over the past couple of years, thinking about the impact of these works as complicating the notion of collecting, and especially complicating the notion of collecting for museums. Similarly, if we look at the work of Cause Collective and the Truth Booth, we've seen this kind of collecting to ask questions about what it means to collect, and also when the audience becomes part of the work itself. So in The Search of Truth, the work of Cause Collective, this was another example of a truth booth being traveled not just around the country, but also globally. And the artists asked members of the public to record short statements that begin with "the truth is." And these are recorded video recordings. And so one of the questions here is, in the end, who owns the work, and what does it mean to collect a work that already collects the audience's participation itself? If we look at the work of someone like Adrian Piper, for Piper's The Probability Trust Registry, which premiered at the 2015 Venice Biennale, and also was she also won the Golden Lion Prize for that work. That was the Biennale, of course, that was directed by none other than the late Okwueyin Wazer, All the World's Futures. In this work, she questions and underscores ideas of audience completion of the work, and also audiences completing contracts. And so thinking about the ways in which the audience completion also involves a contract that needs to be signed. And so by means of a receptionist that you see here at a booth, the artist asks visitors to sign a piece of paper and place it in a time capsule to be sealed for 100 years. And visitors could choose one of three contracts. One of the contracts would have read, quote, "I, the undersigned, hereby certify that I will always mean what I say," end quote. And so and they also, in many ways, these questions that Adrian Piper asked us all to sign, those of us who would have participated in this work, are very much about trust. And in the words of Naomi Beckwith in conversation just recently, they're also very much about, saying that you're not going to lie, right? You're going to be honest. So another series to think about as well, especially around the work of performance art, is a series called the Identify series that curator Dorothy Moss began more than a decade ago at the National Portrait Gallery. And so while performance can be hard to collect, it can also be energizing to exist in collections and to interact with collections. And so in this work, Moss has commissioned more than a dozen artists to do performance works that energize and animate the collections themselves and help us understand the institution's existing collections. And if you can kind of think about the National Portrait Gallery, I grew up in Washington, D.C., going to all the museums on the Mall, and this one in particular, but as a kid, it was just filled with, kind of stodgy old portraits of, dead presidents and maybe old white men. I think that with this work, she was really trying to encourage contemporary artists like Magda Campos Pons, Jeffrey Gibson, and others to really energize what's there in the collection. And I think it's had really amazing results, not only in terms of the ways in which the visitorship to the museum has grown, and of course we can think about the Obama portraits, that's separate, but related, but also in terms of what the museum is thinking about and continuing to do in terms of its collecting mission.
So if we think of these themes of collecting, from politically complicated work and the idea of acquisition or purchase, through performance as enlivening collections via participatory work and who owns it, how is it collected and held, the question that follows that's about the future of collecting is how do we consider collections of the past? And Naomi Beckwith talked about this as museums as collections of collections. In this case, how do we think about antiquities in the holdings of museums? The French President Emmanuel Macron commissioned a 2018 report by SAR and Savoy on the restitution of African cultural objects from European museums. These number in the hundreds of thousands and in the many tens of thousands, even for individual institutions. And something like 90 to 95% of African cultural objects are located outside of the African continent. One direction for future collecting is whether it's possible to use blockchain technology to expand the number of solutions and the ways of thinking about collaboration across institutions. A group that both of us are involved with, called the Art and Antiquities Blockchain Consortium, explores the ways in which there can be ownership rights, exhibition rights, cash flow payments, or savings. So you might imagine a situation where a work is in a collection, it needs to be returned. The source country or organization allows the museum to keep exhibiting it for a while, but ownership is returned. And then there can be cash flows that go directly or that go into a fund to build a museum in the source country. So these questions of access, I think, are very complicated and connect to these also more contemporary questions of collecting and the way collections are connected to exhibitions as well.
So not only are we looking at the examples of blockchain technology as they relate to the ongoing questions around works of cultural heritage from the continent of Africa and actually globally as well, we're also thinking about how when we talk about performance art, we might also think about other forms of collections building. I love this example from the very recent Black American Portraits exhibition at the LA County Museum, curated by Christine Y. Kim and Dr. Liz Andrews. It was a great show, and if you didn't get a chance to see it in LA, please join us in Atlanta at Spelman College, where we'll have it in the spring of 2023. So not only performance, but exhibitions themselves can be tied to interesting collections building. Lacma's Black American Portrait Show was conceived as part of the museum's programming during the touring of the Obama portraits. And what's fascinating and key about this show is that it's a collection show that includes work from the Lacma permanent collection and newly collected works for the exhibition. So instead of just exhibiting the work, the museum supported it structurally and the artists themselves by collecting it for the show. Indeed, it was precisely a new acquisitions exhibition. Lastly, what does it mean for museums to collect work but not display it? Especially thinking of the initiatives to make museum collections more representative along the, if we want to go back maybe a generation or more, the 60s era, Black Arts Movement era, DEI&A initiatives, and those grounds. I often think of the work by Malcolm Bailey that you see here. This is a work that I've written about extensively for my own research, and one that has continued to compel me. It was acquired by the Whitney not long after it was made in 1969, yet it stayed in storage until it was exhibited in the 2015 show, America is Hard to See, when these new galleries in this lovely museum reopened. And it's great to rediscover the work, but also what does it mean to collect things that are not displayed for so long? I think that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. So how do we deal with this idea of collecting works that are, in a way, hoarded and hidden? And I think that this is something that is changing. And the Bailey, of course, is now on view. And there's a lovely photograph that we'd like to show you that Jane Panetta snapped for us just the other day in sharing this installation view with us, and sharing it in such a way that helps us to really reimagine and rethink the relationship of this important work from the late 1960s to other works of American art in the Whitney's collection. More broadly, though, we are seeing waves, and have seen, I would say, for about the last, 10 to 15 years, particularly African-American artists in their 80s, some of them in their 70s, some of them even as old as their 90s, getting their first museum shows or market purchases of their works over $100,000. So with the shift of museums to a deeper awareness of the urgency of collecting work by women and by people of color, how does this relate to both the care and the dollars and cents? Are the works being shown or collected in name, or are they being stored? How is it that we get access to seeing these works? And how is it that the artists who've made them also get access to understanding how they relate to other museum collections and other contemporary artists who are working alongside them? How do these actions, in fact, affect the market itself, which is to say recognition for the artists and also economic sustainability for those artists? And to ask about museum storage and the way in which we see sort of a fraction of the collections on view, a question about storage comes up around its relationship to who's in storage and who's on display. So I'm going to ask my collaborator here to come up, and you've got the last word. As we've shared it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are things that are exciting and bittersweet in these stories, and there's a kind of power in asking these questions now and understanding the passage of time since 1969, but also the possibility in the work being on view now, and stewardship from the present forward. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Finley.
And I think that it really, as you were saying too, thinking about the difference between 69 and today, and the example of this work also really points to the question that you've asked us all to kind of grapple with today, and that is, what is the future of collecting? Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be invited to speak about collections. And I'm grateful to my colleagues on the panel for opening up some groundwork that I also wanted to lay down myself. This is a work by Bo Dick. It's a Zenoko Mask, a cannibal woman, but she's not always a woman. She shifts genders sometimes. And this was a frequent work that Bo would often sell to collectors. So despite this being a panel collecting for the future, I wanted to lay a little groundwork, particularly as it concerns collections and the collecting of Indigenous art and our cultural belongings. And I want to propose a term that we've been using, my colleagues and I, instead of objects or artifacts, we like to use the term cultural belongings because it implies that it might also have a home elsewhere and that it might belong to someone else too. So we know, of course, that the museum is a frame. It's not necessarily a conventional one. Its edges shift, and it creates borders within borders or collections within collections, to cite Naomi, which can sometimes act as dividing lines between us and them, particularly when it comes to questions of ownerships, of rights, and also the rehoming of our cultural wealth. Speaking now as a Native person. Here, in the lands now known as the United States, often, and as well as in Canada, where I'm from, when conversations first began with museums regarding the repatriation or the rematriation of our ancestors' belongings, often things that were outright stolen or sold under duress, this frame, and I hope we don't do this in museums of the future, but this frame was used as the very basis to refuse their return. So the museum contains and creates protocols, certain conditions like climate and storage, certain knowledge and collections management that they would say were not always available in our home communities. And be aware, of course, of the inherent bias in these statements, and I want to not always take them as a given. And I also want to recognize that oftentimes, if our things are able to come home at all, they are things transformed. So how do our collections practices, how do our semantics, how do our protocols also become part of the bodies of the objects in which we say that we're caring for? Because they can also they're also carried with them. And for a long time, I was really obsessed about, and this continues, the kind of excuses developed by museums as to why they couldn't give our things back, even when it's clear that they shouldn't have had them in the first place, and they were often acquired through dubious means. I'm looking at the British Museum too right now. So one of the first people in Canada to try to get back the regalia and belongings from the potlatch bands that are understood as beings, that is, things with life and specific protocols of care, was a man named James Seward, and this was in 1967. So he wanted to make first, which was a pretty basic, straightforward monetary argument. He said, why don't we simply give you the amount of money that you gave for these things, and if it was $0, we'll give you $0. $200, we'll give you $200. And so he was brokering this on behalf of his community in Alert Bay, and he was Kwakwaka'wakw, same as Bo Dick. So the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto argued that James Seward, that his community not only pay for the purchase price of the objects, but also the price of the so-called care and restoration that they underwent while in their holdings. And of course, the monetary value that they assigned to that was a value that there was no way that the community could raise those funds. So again, they reiterated that these were objects transformed, in this case by care and also different ideas of capital. But they did eventually come home. And a lot of folks in Alert Bay, in the community where they returned to, say that they still seem a little bit homesick, as though they're stuck between worlds. So how are collections also in a way kind of world building? So some of these returns predicated that a form of a museum be built to enable the return. And this is how Umista in Alert Bay on a small island in the west coast of Canada was built. And I'd argue that this is a museum of the future, albeit one that refuses to be named a museum. They call it a cultural center instead. And it does It does adhere to some of the protocols of the museum because that was part of the agreement of the return of our cultural belongings. But I'm also interested in other refusals, and some of those refusals, I think, speak to the contemporary moment as well. Sometimes museums say that they refuse to give our things back because they've quite literally been poisoned. They've been poisoned by their treatment in museums, and a lot of that treatment was to dust them with arsenic. So now they're sickened, and now they can't come home because they're toxic. Another more complex narrative of refusal, and this is mainly in museums in Europe, is that they might infect communities with sicknesses that people no longer have immunities to. So colonial infection used it as an excuse to keep those things that were not rightfully theirs. So our belongings have now become their wealth, and yet they don't always see the value in their return. So I collaborated with Bodic for Documenta 14, and this is the display in Athens, Greece. And part of the reason that I worked with him was because he's someone who's constantly intervening into collections. And because he also really understood, he's passed now, but he really understood how capitalism works. So what you see here in the foreground is a gathering of atlakim or forest masks. And they tell the story of a journey of a young boy, one who was pretty terribly abused by his father, and for whom the beings in the forest become his teacher and his guide. And he returns home with this new knowledge and these new skills. So here, these masks are displayed in the order in which they're danced in ceremony. And they include 3 masks for which the songs are now lost, as Bo was in the process of the best kind of tradition, and that is its invention. And the reason I wanted to work with him and these masks in particular was because of an intervention that he staged in a commercial gallery, Macaulay Fine Art, and I think it was back in 2012. And it was midway through the exhibition, he removed all of these masks from the gallery because they were never intended to be for sale, they were just for display, and they were brought back to the community, and they were part of a ceremony there. So again, refusing their collection. And then some of the masks were ceremonially burned in front, and he invited a lot of collectors, he invited all the galleries that he worked with, and he would often, pit them against one another. He invited artists and, of course, all the people in his community. And midway through their exhibition at Documenta 14, they were also intended to be removed from stands he designed and make the return journey home to Alert Bay for use in a potlatch. And that potlatch was suspended by the artist's passing just a few days before the exhibition opened. But in doing so, what we wanted to do was to respect and underscore their agency, their role in their home community, and, in a way, the social life of objects. So I see this collection of masks as a collection for the future, one which necessarily challenges conventions of ownership, the assumed time or temporality of exhibitions or display, and the frequent use of our material wealth to bolster the holdings of other museums. Often ones that are not equipped with the knowledge of the protocols of that which they are collecting. And I think that this definitely holds true for contemporary collections that are working through their DEI work now. It's who are you hiring? Who holds the knowledge of those things that you want to collect now? And hovering above these masks, the forest masks, is another Zenoko mask, the largest one that Bo ever made. And of course, this is a cannibal again, but you're only aware of her as you turn your back and you exit the galleries. And midway through the exhibition, he wanted us to open up her eyes because her eyes could articulate. So for me, the future of collections is bound up with conversations about repatriation, reparations, and repair. I think all the time about how much the wealth of our ancestors lives in a kind of permanent stasis in the belly of museums, in nondescript storage spaces, on cold metal shelves. I've also been thinking about artists who are practicing what I've been calling repatriation or rematriation otherwise. I'm also thinking about this work. This work is a work by Harold Mendez. It's a 3D printed sculpture. And in it, you see a small, what was formerly a clay monkey grasp the neck of this vessel. It's a digital replica of such a vessel, one rubbed dark with graphite. And out of its neck comes a recorded voice. And what you see underneath the monkey is a seed pod with part of its outer shell peeled away to form parts of the vessel's body, and its slender ends curl upward like a mouth, complete with seeds as teeth. So I'm thinking about the gallery as a vessel. I'm also thinking about entanglements. And oftentimes what I learned through my research is this vessel was used to hold a fermented drink. So I think there are many reasons to smile after you drank it. So something in its digital presence calls to the original too. This original was made by Chumi people. It's not an artifact spelled variously with an E or an I, but of course, as I said before, a cultural belonging. So museums, and I think even our collections that we make now in contemporary spaces, sometimes have tendencies towards salvage anthropology, that is, conspicuous collecting. And they've tried sometimes, I think, with little success to rid these belongings of their agency. But how do we return to that? How do we think about sometimes these items as life cycles that have been interrupted, that might live in permanent stasis? What are their non-lives, and how can we bring new lives to these non-lives? This might be a form of digital repatriation, one not focused on an object's return as a historical corrective, but it's on its recapitulation through the invention of new dwellings, of new worlds for the copies. Speaking of copies. Here's another future of collections. Although when you look at it here, it might not seem so at first. So museums are starting to do this as well, but differently. They're not always willing to let go of their hoards, at least not in their entirety, so they're making copies. They're producing exacting prints of things like ceremonial masks by first photographing every aspect of them, including their insides. And then they become printed in plastic, eyes carved by hand, printed in plastic, articulated wooden mouths printed in plastic, eyes here at once whale and human printed in plastic. Even the mass imperfections are replicated. And then in some cases, they're sending the copies back to communities so that local artists can complete them based on a mix of customary and invented protocols. They're painting them as though they're made of wood, they're adding leather ties to them, they're affixing skin, hair, shell, and other items to them, and they're dancing these copies in abridged ceremonies that take place inside museums. The newly authenticated copy has truly come home, and while returning the original mask back to the community, the museums are showing the copies in their place. This is a work by Tanya Lukin Linklater called We Wear One Another, as part of an exhibition that's now traveling with the assistance of Independent Curators International called Soundings, an exhibition in 5 parts. And I was inspired by a set of protocols that Tanya's made in relation to this work, a seal gut parka, that is in the collection of the Manitoba Museum of Man in Winnipeg. And she, as well as many others, I think, are practicing a kind of form of repatriation otherwise. The thing that she felt was really important first as part of her practice was to make a link between the absent body, represented by the gut-skin parka, and her own. She also invited the Apache violinist Laura Ortman and dancers Kaiwin Gober and Dana Rosales to collaborate with the cultural belonging as well. And then they created something as an extended engagement that she called it open rehearsals that erupted in new choreographies, new music, and new songs. And the first question that she asked was how this parka, this nameless parka, because when it entered the Museum of Man, only the white collectors were written down, so no one knows about its maker or makers. But she was asking how this parka itself could become a score. That is a template for other engagements. And what she did as well is she went to visit it in Manitoba. She asked for its permission. She asked for its consent to be part of this exhibition. She asked for it to travel to Kingston, Ontario, to the Agnes Etherington Arts Centre. She asked if we'd be willing to be part of this migration. She spent 3 days with it. Because in those 3 days, she was trying to attend to the silences and gaps in knowledge that are often attendant to museum collections, because for her, this is part of the restore and the repair. So I am now the custodian of a collection. This one is a lending collection at Forge Project, where I'm the director. And it's a new one. It's been, we've been acquiring over the past year. And the collection is entirely made up of artists from what I call Native North America. I would say that the ease in which we were able to acquire the collection is not just because of relations that we had. It's also evidence of the fact that this work was out there because other museums haven't been doing the work. So it's not just a positive thing. The reason that we're a lending collection is because we're trying to get this work out into the world for people to have access to it, for artists to have access to it. So we want to engage with what we hope is a kind of radical accessibility, meaning that we try to make loans, we turn around loans as quickly as we can. We don't have a bias towards major museums. We also, work with cultural centers nearby. It's really about visibility as one of the pillars of what we're trying to do. So it was formed out of recognition that there are certainly gaps, particularly in collections that purport to provide histories of American art here. What is the rightful place of Native artists within this? Not as inspiration for others, and we can blame the hierarchies of modernism and its attendant white supremacy for this, but their role in actively shaping these movements. So this is a collection inherently about visibility, because sometimes it's just that simple. But also with custodianship comes certain responsibilities and ways of bending the rules. And this is an example that I wanted to close with, because for us, this work is just beginning. So this sculpture, which is entitled Toes Out by Natalie Ball, was recently featured. We received a loan request that was unusual from a TV show called Rutherford Falls that was recently canceled, but it has had all Native writers, pretty much an all Native cast. But given that a TV show is an inherently for-profit venture, as part of the condition of the loan, we asked for a loan fee to be paid to the Klamath water dispute that Natalie Ball was directly involved in, that was taking part in her homelands, and she's now a tribal councilwoman at Klamath. And the show did this without hesitation, and we don't normally charge loan fees. So in this way, it was a way of, creating a different kind of economy around a work, setting something else into motion. And I think for those of us who find ourselves in the position of stewarding collections, what are new ways of enacting different conditions, even different loan fees? What are different protocols for collections and how they're made public? Because this does not need to be business as usual. I think what I like to try to do is follow the lead of artists and also the artworks themselves, paying attention to the things that they're questioning and the things that they're already trying to set into motion. I'm interested in the micro levels of how we put these things into practice, and as always, of course, the agency of artists and objects within this. So thank you.
Hello. First off, like everyone else, I'd like to thank Jane and Kim and Ramsey for the invitation to speak here today. And I'm really humbled by the idea that I may have something to say to museum professionals. I know that working in a museum is different from thinking about museums from afar and visiting museums occasionally, and that the bureaucracy and dailiness of the former often overwhelms the spontaneous encounter with art that a lot of us have stopping by only once in a while. For in general, I think it's fair to say that the museum remains a site for special occasions. Ever since I saw this sculpture by Bruce Nauman at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles in the early 1990s, I knew that the museum was different from other places I'd visited and that it was one where I wanted to spend more time. I'm indulging myself a little with personal history here, but I'm also trying to make the point that strange things can happen in the museum that we don't quite understand, that museums and memories are related, and that both have the power to send us down challenging and often rewarding paths. It's a commonplace to say that the museum has been under considerable scrutiny these last number of years, but I think that for the most part the emphasis has been on how museums run, how they fund themselves, who sits on the board of trustees, who steers the helm, whether or not staff are unionized. Many of these issues might be described as under the hood, or as the museum's mechanics. And I think we all know now, if we didn't before, that none of these matters can be written off as extraneous to the museum's central mission of care and preservation. Art's relative autonomy can never extend so far as to justify not paying a living wage. I think that what's exciting about this panel today is that it presents us with the opportunity to consider the what of the museum, not simply what it shows and presents, but also what it collects and archives. And I think we can see now, too, that the museum must be considered a complete organism, with its spaces of exhibition and its spaces of administration closely aligned. The what and the how, in other words, the content and the medium, the talk and the walk, are inextricable from one another. But in order to go forward, I want to go back to the beginning and ask the seemingly simple question, what is a museum? So far, I think the museum has considered itself to be more or less an encyclopedia. Hence, the encyclopedic museum is the museum. The encyclopedia is supposed to have everything inside it. It's an Enlightenment project, as is the museum, and both were meant to usher forth and organize the world. Both set a standard and provide a canon. What's left out is outside the field of knowledge, and hence these technologies set the terms for argument. Only what's inside can be discussed. So getting in is important. Though these days there's often a desire to get out, there's power to be found here. The collection is power, and power we know is knowledge, and vice versa. But getting collected, of course, might also mean losing power. It might mean having been stolen and colonized. The encyclopedia differs from the encyclopedic museum in important ways. Where the encyclopedia describes things from a distance, the encyclopedic museum needs to possess the thing itself. So while there can be endless encyclopedias, there can only be a handful of encyclopedic museums. Dealing in finite resources, they can only be finite resources themselves. And while the encyclopedic museum's galleries might think of themselves as volumes in a comprehensive accounting of all that is known, their cumulative force establishes a narrative much more powerful than the encyclopedia's alphabetically randomized order. So, for example, where anteater might abut anthracite in the encyclopedia, Greek leads to Roman in the museum. The museum is a kind of out-of-order encyclopedia, an encyclopedia that, instead of based on the principle of montage, aims to tell a coherent story. And here I should just say, I kind of addressed the Whitney and the rest of this. I think unconsciously I thought that was the mandate here today, and perhaps since I don't work as a museum, I decided to adopt the Whitney as my subject to address. But what kind of museum is the Whitney Museum of American Art? Is it an encyclopedia of America, of American art? In many ways, the name is misleading, or at least somewhat grandiose, since the museum, as many of you here know, grew out of a private collection that itself was born out of a coterie of artists and patrons in 1930s New York City. It's not even 100 years old. Deep in a depression, American art went in search of identity, with some folks, including cultural critic Louis Mumford, believing that it might shore up taste, while others, such as educational philosopher John Dewey, hoping it might provide some kind of democratic experience. The general desire, I think, was that art would somehow be useful. And it's my sense that in this regard, the Whitney was perhaps something of an outlier. I always imagine the early Whitney as a somewhat louche, libertine, or at least gilded place. In any case, I think American at this point in the 1930s meant mostly not European, which is where art was thought to come from. So if European art was classic, time-honored, and built on big principles, American art could start to work in the opposite direction. It could be casual, ephemeral, and prone to sentiment. At this point, at least, it wasn't striving for the I-contain multitudes expansiveness of Whitman's America, nor the indigeneity of its first peoples. So American art was defined at the Whitney verse via personal predilections, almost by default. So Edward Hopper became American. I like the Edward Hopper painting of the sad clown, Soir Bleu, and it's interesting to think what's American about that. Our exceedingly white protagonist is no Piero. He's sad and alone, and maybe those are American qualities, but Picasso's seated harlequin looks sad and lonely too. Maybe the painting's Americanness has something to do with its difference, with its many types of characters, their varied social positions, and the separateness between them. In any case, I digress. I think what I really want to say is that the Whitney collection is patchy, incomplete, and that it's always been that way. It has moments of depth, but it also has lots of frayed surfaces, tiny bits and pieces, shiny things, and one-offs. So if we're talking about collecting here and making collections matter, one would probably figure that the goal is to fill out the collection, to make it comprehensive, to make it an encyclopedia Americana, to make it sing the song of all ourselves. And that's probably not a bad idea. But because I think my job here is to push against received wisdom to some extent, I'm going to argue against this way of going about things, or at least offer another possibility. And it's not only due to the material difficulties involved with the former. It's because I think art will never be an adequate reflection of society. Let's stop saying art is a reflection of its time. Rather, the institution of art can only be an argument for a way of seeing and what we might want to see. The idea of the encyclopedic museum rests on a reflection theory of art, and it is tied to a conception of the world that holds institutions as not only valid, but also comprehensive, in charge, complete, able to satisfy everyone and anyone. But these, I think, are outdated ideas. No one really believes them anymore. The official and definitive is always changing, and the museum can't keep up. It needs to pay attention to what's going on in the wider world, but it's not a newspaper. It shouldn't be reporting on things. As I think many of you here have seen, it's not particularly good at breaking stories. So instead of the encyclopedia, I want to suggest another kind of book that might offer us a different model, the volume of essays. And in many ways, I think that Whitney already follows its tenets. I'm just trying to articulate them a little more, if only for myself. Whereas the encyclopedia is founded on the logic of equivalence, no one thing is more important than the next, the essay is defined by Montaigne, makes space for idiosyncrasy. It was always a best effort, a work in progress, an attempt, an argument, and never anything wholly conclusive. In fact, it was often discontinuous, clobbered together, mosaic-like. I do not teach, Montaigne said, I relate. Thus, the essay is based on genuine curiosity, conviction, and connection. Passionate and partial, it can never really be finished. As Adorno put it in his essay, Essay as Form, its concepts are not derived from a first principle, nor do they fill out to become ultimate principles. Luck and play are essential to it. So here's one substitution we might make, not the encyclopedic museum, but the essayistic museum. And Paulina kind of nodded to this earlier. And these are just two books of essays that I like. Despite my best efforts, it seems I've still been addressing the how of the museum because I've focused on forms of exhibition and presentation. But in closing, let me try one last time to connect how and what, the back and the front, the object and the apparatus. I want to make a suggestion, a kind of thought experiment, about how works of art might enter the museum, especially given that the title of this panel is Collecting for the Future. I want to suggest that the museum stop purchasing art, that it stop buying things. Before I say anything further, I want to be clear that this idea doesn't stem from any fantasy that we can, or even should, live outside the market. Rather, I want to argue that the idea of a chosen few deciding what will be important in the future is not necessarily the best way to make use of the museum's awesome power. The museum is a compelling technology of preservation and presentation alike, and I think those are techniques that many people are still very committed to today, despite the generalized discontent with the institutions that wield them. So instead of making purchases, I want to propose that the museum exclusively accept gifts, and not only tax write-off style donations, but contributions from artists and communities whose work would otherwise fall into obscurity and disrepair, and who would like to show their work to as wide and engaged an audience as possible. This would be a way for the museum to return to its roots as a custodian of cultures, for it to host arguments, indeed essays, about what constitutes, in one example, American art. Each gift would offer an ending to the sentence, American art is. Properly staffed and generously resourced, the museum would transform into a repository worthy of the public's respect. What better way for museums to regain the trust of its constituencies than for artists and communities to entrust their most precious possessions to it? Obviously, this would be a gamble requiring plenty of good faith from both sides. Much trust would have to be earned, old grudges worked through, certain cynicisms held at bay. But I don't think this has to be a story of elite capture. Rather, it might be a tale of redistribution and the redelegation of resources. Many parties might have much to gain. For if there's anything we've learned from the past few years, it would seem to be that preserving memory is often the most productive way of projecting alternative futures. Thanks so much.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone here at the Whitney, and thank all of you for sticking with it to the end. I'm the last speaker today. It's a pleasure to be with you here and to speak about the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. As a new institution on the cusp of opening, the subject of collecting for the future and its many implications is indeed at the forefront of the work we are undertaking as we build and plan. Although much of our activities are still under wraps as we work towards our public launch, I aim to share what I can about our work behind the scenes and to discuss some of the strategies we are engaged with as we move through considerations relative to the museum's collections. As a museum not yet open, the Lucas may still be unknown to many. We announced this week that our opening year is 2025. And while that might feel far away, we know in museum timelines that's basically tomorrow. To begin, let me briefly introduce the museum and its collection. I'm not going to speak to the slides individually, but we'll move through them quickly to share as much as I can. We are a museum dedicated to the art of visual storytelling. We believe that focusing on stories within art is a vehicle for positioning the museum as an empathetic space, a place where narratives can connect us as we work towards a more just society. Our values are people first, meeting people where they are, inspired in that art can move you to think, to feel, and to act, collaborate, acting nimbly and working together, and brave in our curiosity and creativity. Our building is 300,000 square feet with 100,000 square feet of exhibition space. It sits on an 11-acre campus that brings new green space to South LA. The museum has a restaurant and cafe, 2 state-of-the-art theaters, a library, classrooms, green technology, and an outdoor amphitheater. In these recent construction images, you can begin to see the building take shape, and here you see the building's oculus, which is a beautiful architectural feature that allows you to look up to the sky from the plaza. And now, in the interest of making sure I can address the central questions of this panel, I'm going to run through these incredible works in our collection, only to say a little bit about their nature. The collection includes works engaged with historic and personal narratives. Murals and mural-related materials are part of our collection scope. And here we see contemporary art that reflects on iconic images that have circulated broadly within society. Subjects range from intimate stories to national histories and works that relate to cultural experiences. Fantasy, science fiction, cinema, and comics are also distinct parts of the museum's holdings. The collection is currently 130,000 objects, which includes multiple large sub-collections that range in media. Of that figure, 100,000 objects constitute the Lucasfilm archive, while the remainder have been acquired by the museum since 2017. Spanning global geographies and nearly 4,000 years of history, the collection is capacious in scope, while the core of the museum's holdings is in 20th and 21st century American art and visual culture. Our institutional definition of narrative art is one of an inclusive approach to visual storytelling, exploring academically rooted and mass-produced art forms as well as new modes of creative practice. Encompassing all forms of visual narrative, including painting, sculpture, photography, video, performance, and installation, we believe narrative art can provide a window onto lived experience, elicit emotion, ignite imagination, or move us to action. Through our collection and across the museum, we aspire to empower diverse audiences to connect and engage with artworks through the compelling stories they contain. And now let me address the three core questions of our session. How might we envision collections in the future? How do we sustainably care for ever-growing collections? For the Lucas, a two-pronged answer to that is our acquisition strategy and that of museum services planning. First, within the curatorial department, our team just completed a collections gaps analysis so that we can really understand what we have and where we're heading. Core to our work institutionally is a commitment to diversity, equity, access, inclusion, and belonging, or DEIB. We have been carefully studying the collection through the lens of DEIB, and over the past 2 years, our team has worked methodically to statistically articulate the collection's gaps by race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and disability. In this way, we are looking at each area of the collection to understand it in relation to questions of representation, rather than solely by an existing canon of art history that privileges the patterns that we know already to exist. As we worked on this analysis, we recognized immediate areas for attention and have employed focused acquisition initiatives around women, Latinx, and Native artists, for example. Concurrently, we are evaluating collections and acquisitions along traditional art historical categories, while at the same time striving to cut across those divisions. As such, we can look deeply within our collecting areas for acquisitions from across a range of levels of artistic recognition and prominence. Many of our collecting areas, such as illustration and comics, for example, are not widely represented within large institutions, and the opportunities to forge new ground within the field are rich. We are excited to delve into untapped avenues of scholarship, as well as generate diverse opportunities for institutional dialogue. We find ourselves within an interesting conceptual matrix that has tensions that are compelling to think through, determining what we will foreground in our current acquisition priorities and that which we might hold on to for future areas of development. Moving into our long-term strategic planning around the collection, we're mapping out our desired patterns for growth. And the second portion of this question is that of the sustainable care for collections. Currently, our work is to assess existing storage needs and project our growth rate based on our known patterns and what we anticipate our needs may be, but without overestimating our footprint. Our building was not designed with 100% storage capacity for the existing collection, and the planning process of long-term off-site storage is one that we approach with care and measure. As we consider new acquisitions, our storage growth is indeed a logistical factor, but we're still at an early stage where we have some flexibility to engage in active discussion about institutional priorities as we shape the museum that we will become. Next, how does the changing nature of artworks impact our work, and what does that mean for collections? First, let me speak a bit about media in relation to the collection. While we currently do collect digitally born artworks, the bulk of the museum's collections are rather traditional in terms of media. We strive to innovate in technology across the museum. We're exploring ways to activate exhibitions using technology and to advance creative strategies in museum display and visitor experience. Exhibition design and digital interpretation are two areas in which we aspire to push the needle forward, developing compelling and dynamic approaches for engagement with the collection. Next, I'd like to mention conservation as we think about the changing nature of artworks over time. Within our collection, there are discrete conservation projects of individual works such as paintings and sculptures, as well as bigger projects including sub-collections, many of which consist of large quantities of works on paper that we must evaluate and treat. Then we have the Lucasfilm Archive, which has diverse needs. For example, there are latex objects as well as kit-bashed models, props, vehicles, and characters from the original Star Wars films that were handcrafted by master prop makers nearly 50 years ago. Additionally, textiles are a major area for us, as we have hundreds of costumes that have their own special concerns for long-term care. As we work through all of these areas, we're thinking about collection access across different platforms for research, scholarship, and public needs and digitization timelines. Lastly, how do we care for and manage artist relationships in connection to collecting? As a new museum, that isn't very deep for us in terms of history, but we anticipate robust artist relationships unfolding across the institution. Some possibilities include artist residencies, using our collections for points of departure for the creation of new work, or collaborating with artists to curate around our holdings. Exhibitions and projects of all types will emanate from our collections or in relationship to the framework of narrative art. We foresee opportunities for research, publications, public programming, digital interpretation projects, and partnerships with retail, among other areas. As we move towards opening, we'll grow our capacity for deepening our institutional relationships with artists. And at the Lucas, we're looking forward to the exciting future that lies ahead of us and to welcoming you all to the museum when we open. Thank you so much.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes, thank you. Thank you all so much. The first thing I just want to say, as a matter of business, I know it's 4:30 now, but I think we're going to go. We don't want to miss the chance to hear more from this incredible group, and we also want to leave some time for questions, so we'll go until 5 o'clock. Hopefully that works for lots of people in this room. Just want to say a big thank you to all of you, and a couple things. I think in thinking about these panels, we were excited to have many museum professionals, people that worked in museums, modern and contemporary museums. I think we're also excited in this panel to have participants who are academics, thinkers, and also Pilar and Candice who are involved in very new museums, that's sort of a different kind of endeavor than navigating a collection like the Whitneys or a long-standing existing collection. So I think that was a kind of intentional thing, and it felt really meaningful how that played out in your presentations here. I have like two questions I want to be sure we get to, and Pilar, you set me up really nicely for the first one I wanted to talk about, which is around artists. And I think that's a big question for us here at the Whitney. What's the relationship between collecting and an artist? It's maybe not the kind of immediate connection that we always made, but it came up as we've been working on this collection strategic plan. And of course, the other kind of major track for this museum, right, is our biennial. So this issue of artists and caring for artists, this came up with Candice and in other presentations, even Cheryl, what you were saying about what does it mean for an artist to have their work kind of buried in storage. So I want to come back to that issue of artists, and as we look ahead and we think about kind of ethically, meaningfully, thoughtfully, differently building collections, can we talk a little bit more about what that engagement with artists might look like? And it could be around the question of things living in storage, the pace at which we collect. Alex, we'll come back to your proposal in a minute, don't worry. But wanted to kind of dig in with that. And Pilar, you were kind of forecasting some of that, but I'm curious to hear from people on that question. Anyone? Yeah.
All right, I'll go.
Jump in, please.
I realize I said very little about the physical place where Forge is at. So it's actually housed in two former residences. So we're not a museum. We don't call ourselves a museum. We have a lending collection. We have a fellowship. We work with artists. We have a publication program. We just launched a journal. If you know of any, we're prioritizing Native authors. If you know anyone who wants to get paid $1 a word to write for us, please tell them. But in terms of the relationship with artists, I think number one, we center our work on artists making work right now, today, so that we can support the work that they're doing at this moment, not necessarily support which has been quite damaging, I think, to Native art, and that is a speculative secondary market where collectors hold a lot of power and agency, and where artists and communities don't even know where their work is. So I'd say that most work made by Native people historically is held in private hands. It's not actually even in public institutions. So that means a lot of our history is not even visible to ourselves. The other thing that we try to do as much as possible is host artists there. It's about 20 minutes outside of Hudson. It's on the ancestral homelands of the Mohikaniak people. It's actually a place of great displacement. So what does it mean to bring people to that place? How do you do that with care? And I'd say one thing that we do when we work with artists is we don't put any conditions on their time when they come. That's also the same for the fellowship that we've developed. People don't come with a proposed project. I think one of the characters of museums inherently is to be extractive. So how much do we always try to challenge that, understanding that even time can be something that's extractive? How do we interrupt that? How do we have different relations? And we often will ask artists, if there's anything that they're interested in, and one of those, say one of the co-founders of Forge is really helpful for this, Zach Foyer, because he ran a commercial gallery for many years here, not far from here. And one of the things that I think is often not that clear or visible or transparent or has many ethics is the commercial gallery world. So how do you navigate that? So we talk to people about that as well, often one-on-one, because those are very hard conversations, and I've never actually heard one in public.
I said a little bit about what some of our ideas are around artist relationships and ways that we're going to connect to the artist community. But I can say, it's really quite something to just be on the cusp of the birth of a new institution that you anticipate will be in the world for 100 years or 200 years, if we're lucky. And just thinking about that in relationship to time, and coming from my own, background prior to this institution, my relationships with artists have been, 2 decades long in some cases. And I think, that is a kind of outlook for a large institution to have, is long-term investment, long-term relationships. The type of work that we're collecting is both in the market and completely outside the market. So it's a lot of different entry points, and we don't have necessarily a lot of those relationships fortified in the way that we will, at this moment. And we are doing things like collecting entire archives that belong to artists. And I know that was brought up earlier about, how do you care for, or what happens to someone's work when they've never really participated in a gallery system or structure. No one's been there to care for that work along the way. And that's been really exciting to do at this organization, because we do have that ability, either with, an artist or with an artist's estate, and working with the families. So, that's been something to think about as we grow, like what is our commitment to the legacy of an artist as well, and doing a lot of recovery for the types of work that people haven't necessarily paid attention to during an artist's lifetime. So that's also part of the thinking as we move forward.
I've been thinking about something that actually isn't so germane to the work of modern and contemporary institutions, and that is really about naming artists. And I think many of us have cycled through institutions, more encyclopedic ones, even if they're out of order, that have so many works called artifacts with an I or an E, where the artist is unnamed. And so I think one of the other practices that's important to think about as we move into the future is naming and claiming artists, especially when they're coming from a non-white Western tradition. And I know there's a lot of continuous work on that. I heard an amazing story last night, but I won't repeat it in order to not embarrass anyone who may be, even in the room now, but really understanding that oftentimes these objects that are kind of treated ethnographically and are sort of unnamed in terms of their creators and makers, there are still communities in the world who would know who made that. And we, as institutions, aren't doing the work of that research, of finding the people who hold that memory. So that's one sort of, I think, maybe thing I would put out into the world that we could do. But there is another issue, more germane, I think, to maybe the modern period, not so much the contemporary period, but even then in some cases. And that's also around sort of naming and claiming these demographics. And so this is actually something I would love to pose to you as a question, to you, Pilar, which is, how do you do it? One of the things that my team has been working on with many folks, colleagues at this institution and others, is sort of giving terms to people's races and ethnicities when they're no longer with us. And I will say that so many folks in the field are struggling with that in a way that oftentimes I find incredibly sensitive ethically, but also really bemusing oftentimes. Like, there are artists that will come up and I'm like, I know they're black. And they'll be like, but they're dead and we can't ask them and we don't want to name and speak for someone without their permission. And so this question of the ethics of permission, when also trying to do this kind of demographic work that you were also talking about, this kind of a collection gap feeling, I think is also an ongoing conversation and will be an ongoing challenge for institutions.
That's an important question that you're raising, and since we have collections that are historic as well, you look back at certain periods and you're projecting current terminology onto different lived experiences. So I think, taking a lot of care and being very sensitive to that, and knowing that is that you can't apply, the ways that people identify today or to other moments in time, but it does give us a chance to point out and do research around particular artists, even ones whose estates, maybe they were speculated to have a certain, type of sexual orientation, and the estate doesn't want to talk about it that way. That is an example of something that, it comes up for us. But it gives us a really interesting research question to delve into as we move forward and think about what our exhibitions and publications planning is going to look like. But then concurrently, I know someone mentioned earlier the artist questionnaire so that people can self-identify, and we're doing that as well at the beginning of our collections journey, so that we're not putting words in people's mouths. For the living artists that we're collecting, or those who are still with us that manage those estates, or who are the knowledgeable sellers to us, so that we can have the most accurate data that we can at this moment in time.
Yep, we're grappling with it here too. I'm looking over at Ramsey, who's like looking away from me. This is a big thing for us to parse, particularly deceased artists. But Cheryl, Amy, Alex, do you want to say anything about this question of artists and kind of what that relationship may look like as we continue to build collections, or maybe we don't continue to build collections, but.
I'll say something briefly, and this may tee up Alex. Just two different things. One, I'm very interested in the work that Jane Anderson and Kim Christian have done to develop local contexts, this labeling system, where there are icons for many different kinds of labels, and the autonomy of labeling is returned to the indigenous groups, whatever is the right term for me to use there, so that the information about a work of art can be populated in a different language And some of the tags, there's one in particular that's a sacred knowledge tag, something like for human remains, so it actually can be taken out of a collection. The Library of Congress has started using these. So I think that line of thinking is very interesting. The other thing I want to mention is just money, the precarity economically of being an artist, and the question of what is the relationship between museums and support for artistic practice. So this idea of works being gifted, I certainly understand, but I also think the example that Dr. Finley, and the example that Naomi Beckwith was giving of works that are exhibited but then also brought into the collection, and just thinking through the economic footprint for artists and the way that that supports their practice, I think is really important.
Can I just add, am I on? I'm on, okay. Just to maybe add to that, and if this has already been discussed earlier today, or someone else might be able to say something more about this, but I think at one point I've also heard some museums floating the idea of speaking about, the economic precarity for artists, and particularly contemporary artists who might be, just out of art school, never went to art school, or those artists that we also discussed who we know were never really recognized, who are way up there, in their production and also their age. But when you have a work of art in your collection that's in the permanent collection, and then it's being shown, whether it's part of another exhibition, is there something else in terms of, what artists can receive economically that the museum would consider making part of a contract with artists? And Lauren Van Haften-Schick, I think, whom we've referred to in our presentation, a student, she's a PhD now, who's at Wesleyan, is the expert on the artist contract. And I think that there's some iterations of that also demand that when a museum purchases a work, that when that work goes on view, that the artist also receives some form of remuneration. And so I think that's one way to think about, speaking of the economics, working with artists and museums and collections.
Yeah. I mean, I like to your and Alex's point about what if we built a collection through gifts and targeted gifts, arguably. We have had conversations here. We've kind of like caught ourselves, I would say, in the past couple of years, and for saying things like, well, if we show an artist artwork, that's like a form of support and compensation. And I think that was a long kind of entrenched thing that we were like, no, and we're going to move away from that. In fact, in the past year and a half, Cheryl, we decided to compensate artists anytime we show their work as part of a collection display or presentation here. And the idea there was both kind of abstractly, it's a way to support artists in an ecosystem where it's kind of hard to pass funds, one could argue, but also it's compensation for the time and energy that goes into work around a collection display. We ask an artist to do a audio guide, or ask a million questions about what is the frame supposed to look like. Okay, that needs compensation to points that were made in earlier panels.
And it's like a licensing fee, if you will,
Yeah.
right? So if we're thinking about publications, or a work showing in a film or something like that.
There was I'll just put it on the table, a great model started by artists in the 60s in Canada called Carfac.
Yes, we've talked about that a lot.
And now, it's a collective of artists who help oversee it, and they basically put pressure on. We have a very different funding system there. Put pressure on any institution that accepts funding from the Canada Council for the Arts. But the amazing thing about Carfac was that it accounted for any kind of artistic labor, and it was started by artists working in London, Ontario, who considered themselves regionalists, including Greg Cornell. So it includes things like installation, a half-day public presentation, the digital imaging rights for marketing, and it's very granular. And I think it's actually perfect. You could just borrow the whole template. So I've worked in a lot of biennials, and the first thing that I would do when I was working in a biennial, whether it was Site Santa Fe or the most recently Toronto Biennial of Art, is we made an artist fee schedule from the top. Because often if you don't do that from the top, it's very hard to talk about money after the fact. You have to talk about it from the beginning.
I was just going to say, with huge appreciation for that point, that there are these two different logics, right? There's the consumption logic or economic logic and the investment logic or finance logic. So I think that's amazing and really important to talk about fees for labor. And that's an economic logic, like you're spending this time. And then also to think about the investment logic of these things circulate in markets, people collect them, and the sort of parallel world of resale royalties and whether artists retain equity in their work. I think it's a project of finding language around money and markets that feels authentic to you and not overshadowing of the importance of art that's engineering, that doesn't pretend to be architecture. And I feel like I struggle to do that, having taught business to artists for a long time. And so I think it's really great, the kind of the thoughtfulness of what you're saying and the fee structures, and also kind of being curious about when there are investment things at play. I personally think artists are investors in their work, often in many ways that are not quantitative. There's a beautiful book by Alison Gerber, The Work of Art, Value in Creative Careers, which is about this. But
just one other thing, thinking about investment too, because we're talking about compensation in some ways, but I think also maybe another thing, and this is done, for especially large-scale exhibitions, group shows, et cetera, but when works come into the collection, what kind of, writing is done about that work? Is it just when it's a new collection show and we see something new that comes up and we'll know a little bit about that artist and that's it? But is there some type of conversation that might begin that would enable the acquiring institutions to also guarantee artists that there's going to be some form of a publication? Because that leads to, thinking about investment and valuation over time.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add something to that. I really think of museums in a sense as kind of technologies of democratization and technologies for making something public. And in a way, maybe the museum is a kind of incomplete project, right? Like we haven't made the museum itself public enough, right? And I like what and this also has to do with kind of notions of hospitality, and the museum is a kind of host of collections and practices. But I really take your point that the form of making public entails many different kinds of presentation, from even making a digital image. Like when I teach my classes, I'm usually just scraping off museum websites, or writing a text in order to kind of begin to create a context for an understanding and a kind of teaching and dissemination of the work. So yeah, that was just my little annotation.
Yeah, and I think I like that idea so much, Cheryl, because it also, to me, dovetails with the Bailey, even specifically that there's very little known and written about him as an artist, and you can't really find installation shots of the solo show that the Whitney did in 1970. Is that right? And so, and when that work went on view in 2015, it made a big splash. But we, having even some writing on the website, right, about a work like that, just enables it to kind of go out in the world even more so. I mean, certainly the image, but I think that's a really interesting thing that you would kind of commit to doing that at the moment a work was acquired. So I want to leave a minute for questions from the audience, but the other thing I wanted to open this up to, because I know our prompts were maybe more in the kind of pragmatic, tactical vein, let's say, but I really appreciated, Alex, that you're like, well, here's a big idea that you're probably not going to do, but let's play it out for a minute. And I really appreciated that, because we talked about not wanting this day to be about just dissolving collections, but so I appreciate that you did take us there. So I guess I wanted to open this up to everyone and say, are there other kind of big picture, radical, a lot of you kind of brought us right up to the edge, and it kind of outlined so clearly the problem and the questions around the problem, but I'm curious, kind of one step beyond that, are there the kind of more radical gestures, big picture ideas propositions that you kind of fantasize about or talk about privately with people, kind of around how collections might function in the future?
I just want to jump in, and I was thinking about a little bit about what you were saying in the last round of questions too. For me, it's access to the collections, because as we do our ideating about what we want the museum to be, immediately we're like, oh, people should have like full access to these collections. And then when you get into practice, it's like, oh gosh, we have to write about every single work that we already have, and how many years is it taking us? How much research do we have to do? I mean, when you kind of get into the mechanics of it and trying to push that forward, a shout out to the curatorial team of the Lucas Museum. They are working so hard and amazing to do that for us so that we can have the bare bones that we would anticipate a museum of this, scale and scope to have when we open. But we have to start from zero, essentially, to do that. So it's kind of like you want it all there at the beginning, but it's not realistic. We would love to have, ways that people can. I would say we're thinking a lot about how we can have transparency around what's in the collection and to provide access across a lot of different platforms. And then, it's problem solving from there forward with the collections management team, with the registration. How do we deliver on those points of access, and how do we think about that in relationship to learning and engagement and the programs that they're going to be doing? How do we knit all this together? But it's a really complex proposition already just to do that.
I'll go just, you go ahead.
I was actually going to cite you. I was thinking, one of the futures, I always try to look to what artists are doing, what they're questioning, and I think that the proposals that are put on already into practice by folks like Cameron Rowland, the idea that, you can have a work only on loan, it's not sold, it's rented, that there's ideas of how you can create a different kind of economy around that. And I'm also thinking about, already being part of this new institution that's not a museum, is that, this isn't going to be likely a collection that's meant to be held for 200 years. It might only be held for 5 or 10. And then so that you can keep dialogue with artists about what they think is the transforming role of the custodianship of that work, where should its eventual home be, and then is there even co-ownership or co-determining, the future of that collection? And I think that's possible to do.
And I was actually about to cite cultural belongings as a really powerful term. I think there's still so much of a sense of collections as object-based. And I was thinking a lot, listening to the story of the Lucas Museum, about how recent it is and how so many museums have these long histories of collecting that are a little like the closet of an adult person who doesn't change size very often. Every once in a while, I gotta cycle that through. And so I think that it's hard to talk about just like how much stuff there is and how much history of stuff. And this was thematic across all of the talks, the idea of the people really mattering, and people being the institution, who's hired, who's working on stuff, performance, enlivening collections. And then for me, kind of what I would just say, I don't know if it's a big idea, but what's the lens? I think the lens on collections, and I love this lens, is often art historical, but I also miss the artist lens. And the entry points for that, for me, are things like conservation. Someone told me that the MoMA trustees have their meetings in the conservation lab. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's the most beautiful place, and it's such an interesting way to experience works of art in terms of the process of how they're made. So I would just say, what's the lens, and then this sort of people-centered view.
Can I add something quickly? So, I mean, and speaking about the lens and also something that's people-centered, I think it's important and incumbent upon us to look at the communities in which we're situated. That is, if we're talking about museum institutions or institutions themselves, and in terms of collecting, to think about, what does it mean, or what is the role of collecting works of art, or working with artists who come from the communities that are close by, in the neighborhood. There's a scholar and curator, Tyree Boyd Pates, who's based at the Autry Museum in LA, who talks about community-based collecting. And so we often talk about, community engagement and programming in education in museums, but I think also in terms of the kinds of works that we want to bring into our institutions that are also going to bring in people from, the neighborhood, but also globally as well, might be more relatable if they're also coming from those communities that surround us, if they're not already gentrified.
Maybe I already said my kind of big idea.
No, please.
But
If you have another one, we're here for
I
it.
think ultimately how I got there was I want to think of the museum as a space for argument and debate and assertion, and not a place of a final definition. And maybe in a perverse kind of way, I was trying to think, this the gifting, which is also an ask of a host, the resources that need to go into, organizing and writing and preservation, it can be a huge ask. It might be a threatening ask to say, take care of this, right? To think of the idea of donation, though donation's kind of a creepy word for whatever reason, as a kind of opportunity to make an argument that I think this is X, depending on one's institution. So to keep if the museum's going to be kind of worth its weight, to find a way to make it a space of argument, of essay, which just means to kind of try, right? And not a space of kind of finality.
Maybe you're gonna say
Museums are
something.
never good at trying to put on public that they're just trying. But I think that the Museum of the Future should be more subjective. It should be, a test, potentially. It should be open to failure, obviously.
And then briefly, I think I've seen some things around the world that I think are radical already. I mean, there are these moves to having sort of open access collections where it's not about the heavy hand of an exhibition interpreting works, but you just kind of have these open cases and people can get in there. I've seen museums say, push a button, we'll bring this object to you and talk about it with you. I've been able to drink in front of works before. That was wonderful. But things are starting to close in. They're going back to these kind of protocols of care. Like, things actually have gotten more and more severe over the years. And I'm not that old, but once upon a time I felt like audiences had much closer access to work. And I think for me, the more radical moves are about how do we increase like sort of person-to-person access to artworks. But I will put one absolutely blasphemous thing on the table as someone who comes out of a position of working with contemporary art and thinking about what does it mean to work at a museum of contemporary art, to hold a contemporary collection that's going to age out of the contemporary, right? And I want to actually imagine if we could imagine works moving out of a collection, right? That for me would be the most radical thing, that a museum is not a place that holds something in perpetuity. But again, I might get in a whole lot of trouble sort of proposing that. And nor do I have a proposal for how that would happen. But I'd also, I'm thinking a lot about change and metamorphosis rather than stasis in a museum.
No, I think it's been a philosophically very appealing idea to a lot of institutions, is how would you get there? Thank you all so much. Megan, do we have a minute for a question or two?
I have a proposal. I don't know if this is, can you hear me? Okay.
No, we can't.
I thank you all so much. This has been incredible. Thank you all for staying. We've been sitting here for a long time, so I wanted to propose, we have a beautiful reception upstairs in our trustee room on the 8th floor. Could we continue the conversation there? I hope everyone can join us and you can talk. We can be open and make people available, hopefully.
Alcohol.
And there'll be drinks. No works of art, but in the room. But our galleries are also open, and you're invited to visit them as well. So yeah, thank you all. I hope that sounds like a good
That
proposition.
sounds like a great plan. And I just want to thank all of you so much. This was like really amazing. I really appreciate it.